They say that rain brings peace, but some people swear that it's during the storm that the doors to the inexplicable open. Sounds that shouldn't be there, figures standing by the side of the road, and that strange feeling that you're not alone. Today, you're going to hear true stories from people who have experienced rainy nights they'll never forget. But beware, these stories have the power to follow you, even after the video is over. So before the lights flicker or something touches your window, leave a like, comment if you've experienced something similar, and subscribe to the channel, because in the real world, sometimes, terror just needs a rainy night to start. Knocks on the window. The rain was falling incessantly on the small town of Keswick in the heart of England's Lake District. The heavy clouds hid the moon and tinted the sky an oppressive grey. In the out-of-the-way house south of town, built of time-blackened stones and moss that smeared across the walls, young Martha Bennett spent the night alone. Her parents had travelled to London that morning, leaving her with an old border collie named Jasper for company. At 17, Martha was used to the solitude of that old house, but that night there was something different in the air. It was as if the sound of the rain was thicker, heavier, as if each drop hammered directly into his chest. She was sitting on the sofa in the living room, wrapped in a plaid blanket, watching an old movie on the small tube television. Jasper slept at his feet, emitting faint canine grumbles. The windows shook softly in the wind, and the occasional crackle of the house's timber sounded louder than it should. It was then that she heard the first knock. 3 dry, quick ringtones, followed by the sound of rain. He thought it was the wind. He turned his eyes to the screen, trying to ignore the shiver that went up the back of his head. A few minutes later, 3 more crashes came, exactly at the same pace. 3 beats. Pause, and the constant sound of rain began again, as if obeying that sinister cadence. Martha paused the film and was silent. Jasper raised his head attentively, his ears turned to the front window. The girl swallowed hard and approached the window, discreetly pulling the curtain. Nothing. Just the dark yard, the pine trees swaying in the background, and the darkness stretching as far as the eye could see. The rain increased, making it difficult to distinguish shapes or sounds. He decided to lock all the doors, even though he knew he had already done so. He checked windows, checked the attic, and turned on all the lights in the house. Jasper followed her in silence, the hairs on the back of her neck bristling. When he returned to the living room, the old clock on the wall read exactly 11:13 p.m. He sat down again. Silence, just the patter of rain. Then came more beatings. 3, exactly at the same pace, this time in the back window. Martha's body froze. That window overlooked the backyard, where no one passed, especially with the soaked and muddy terrain. Jasper growled low, fixing his gaze in that direction. She got up, but didn't have the courage to approach the window. He decided to call his parents, but there was no signal, no trace of networking. With trembling hands, he took the flashlight and headed for the kitchen, going around the house from the inside. When he reached the back window, he pointed the beam of light outside. Nothing! But there were footprints. Human footprints, very clear, marked in the mud. 2 rows that went to the window, and nothing more. No coming, no going, as if they had come out of nowhere. He took a step back. The heart hammered. He ran back into the room and locked himself in with Jasper, who was now completely on alert. She thought about calling the police, but the landline was also muted. No cell phone, no phone. And now, without the courage to look out the window, she felt that something was watching her. The minutes passed. Midnight. The house was shrouded in an oppressive darkness, broken only by the sound of rain and 3 beats. Now, in the bedroom window, she screamed. Jasper ran to the door, barking furiously. Martha didn't want to see it, I didn't want to look, but I felt that if I didn't, it would come in. With teary eyes, she turned slowly, pulled back the curtain. Nothing, but the footprints were now inside the house, and they started at the bedroom window. The sound of creaking wood indicated that something, or someone, was walking slowly down the hallway. Martha closed the bedroom door, and leaned against it, trembling. Jasper barked uncontrollably. The knocking resumed, now at the door of the room. 3 dry rings as before, accompanied by the silence of the house and the rain. She wanted to scream, but her voice wouldn't come out. Suddenly the lights in the house went out. The pitch was total. Jasper stopped barking. Absolute silence took over. A voice, almost a whisper, sounded too close to his ear. "You heard me, Martha. He always listened. Now see me." She spun quickly, but saw nothing. The darkness seemed dense, alive. Jasper had disappeared. The beats now came from inside the closet. 3, pause. 3, pause. As if time itself pulsated at that frequency, the handle of the cabinet turned by itself. Martha retreated until she hit her back against the wall. His eyes tried to adjust, but it was useless. The closet opened slowly, and inside she saw her own reflection. But there was something wrong. Martha in the mirror smiled. A cold, motionless smile that didn't match the terror the real Martha felt. Then the image spoke. "You let me in." The bedroom window blew out with the force of the wind. The shrapnel flew everywhere, and the image in the mirror walked calmly through the room, while the real Martha screamed in despair. The darkness swallowed everything, and the sound of rain mixed with the steps of the copy walking through the corridors of the house. The next morning, Martha's parents found the house intact. No sign of break-in, no footprint in the mud. Jasper was there, lying on the carpet, as if nothing had happened. Martha was also there, but his eyes, they were no longer the same. And since that night, on every rainy night, knocks echo through the windows of the house, always in groups of 3, silhouettes looking through the fogged window. Fog engulfed the landscape on that November morning in Hallstatt, a village nestled between the mountains of Austria. The calm waters of the lake reflected the mist that covered the roofs of the century-old houses, creating an atmosphere of dream or nightmare, depending on the point of view. It was in this almost static scenario that Helen Vogel settled in for 2 weeks, seeking peace after the recent death of her older sister. The cabin he rented was isolated, far from the village, among bare trees and trails covered with dead leaves. It had 2 floors, old wood-framed windows, and a small balcony overlooking the lake. Helen found the perfect place to process her grief, write in her journal, and get away from the noise of life. The internet was unstable, the cell phone almost useless, just as she wanted. On the 3rd night, something began to change. She woke up around 2 a.m. with an uncomfortable feeling. The silence was absolute, nor the sound of the wind. Nothing. He walked to the kitchen to drink water, and as he passed through the living room, he noticed the window glass fogged up by condensation. And there, behind the glass, a shape, discharge, static, as if someone were outside, watching her. Frightened, she ran to turn on the balcony light, but there was no one. The fog was so dense that one could not see a foot ahead. She thought she was tired, too impressed by her own grief. He went back to bed, but the feeling of being watched did not pass. The next night, while writing in his diary in the armchair in the living room, he saw it again, the fogged window and a silhouette. This time, closer. It didn't move, it didn't hit. It was just there. When she blinked, she was gone. He went up to the room with his nerves in tatters, but still trying to rationalize. Perhaps the fog created illusory forms, but on the 5th night, there was more than one. 3 silhouettes, one in each window on the ground floor, all motionless, with their indistinct faces glued to the glass. Helen froze. Fear prevented any action. She slowly retreated into the hallway, climbed the stairs without taking her eyes off the windows. He called for the local police, but the call dropped before he could explain. She spent the night locked in her room, listening to the steps of the stairs creaking, as if something slowly climb. At dawn, everything seemed normal. No marks on the outside, nothing on the records of the balcony camera, which she had installed herself the day before. Everything clean. However, the upstairs windows began to fog up as well, even for no reason, even without humidity in there. Helen decided to leave that afternoon, but the car wouldn't start. and when he called for help over the radio at the local station, communication was distorted, with constant static. It seemed that the place, or what lived there, did not want her to leave. On the last night, Helen wrote in her diary, "They are not reflections, they are waiting, and now they're in here." His body was never found. The hut was locked by local authorities, but they say that, in the early hours of dense fog, it is still possible to see silhouettes standing in the fogged windows, watching, waiting. 3 months later, a German couple rented the same cabin for a winter getaway. They didn't know Helen's story. On the first night, they took pictures of the landscape in the morning, and when reviewing them on their cell phones, they noticed something strange. In one of the windows of the house, through the fog, there was a dark figure, tall, still, completely still. Thinking it was just a light effect, they ignored it. But during the night, they were woken up by the sound of something scratching the glass. 3 risks, slowly drawn, like claws scratching the blurry. When they went to investigate, there was no one, but the risks were inside the window, and the fog was still there, even with the fireplace lit and the temperature hot. Frightened, they decided to leave the cabin at dawn, but when they opened the door, they saw footprints, wet, inside the room. The couple survived, but never spoke of what they saw that night. They abandoned everything, the rent, the objects, even the car, which was found with the doors open on the nearby road. Since then, the hut has been interdicted, but those who pass by say that there is always something watching through the fogged windows. And now, there are not just 3 messages written on glass. The first message appeared on a Saturday morning, when 29-year-old Sophia Nielsen was still having coffee at the counter of the small country house where she lived in northern Sweden. She had moved there the previous winter, fleeing the hustle and bustle of Stockholm after a traumatic separation. The log cabin, with its creaking walls and old windows, was quiet, secluded, and above all, safe. At least, that's what she believed. That morning, as usual, the steam from the kettle warmed the room, fogging up the kitchen windows. And it was there, in the fogged glass facing the woods, that she saw for the first time tiny letters, traced with her finger, slowly emerging from the mist of the window pane. "Hear me." Sophia thought it was a joke. Maybe he had written that without realizing it days before. He wiped the cloth, cleaned it thoroughly, and tried to forget. But the next morning, there was another message. "I'm here." This time, she stood for several minutes in front of the glass. There were no external marks, no sign of break-in. He locked all the windows again and tried not to think about it. Still, anguish began to grow. The isolation, which had once brought him peace, now became suffocating. On Monday, he woke up to the sound of the rear door alarm, the sensor indicating opening. But when he ran there, everything was intact. On the glass of the room, the new message, "I need to talk to you." Sophia began to record everything with photos and videos, thinking that perhaps she was becoming paranoid. But the messages continued, always written with fine strokes, as if someone were on the other side of the glass, or worse, inside the house. He decided to install cameras. For 3 nights, nothing appeared. The messages continued. "Look at the attic," said one of them. The stairs leading to the attic were sealed. She had never climbed it. But something about that sentence bothered her deeply. He gathered courage, pulled the retractable ladder, climbed with a flashlight. Dust, old boxes, rats, nothing much. Until he found a diary, old, with a black cover, with yellowed pages. Next to him, a porcelain doll with cracked eyes. The diary belonged to a girl named Elin, who lived in that same house in 1987. The last pages were confusing, with phrases repeated several times. "He's up here. He won't let me leave. No one listens to me." And finally, "If anyone reads this, listen to me." Sophia got off in panic. That night, he locked everything up and didn't sleep. In the morning, the message was different. "Now you know." She wanted to leave, but the car wouldn't start. and as he tried to call the police, one last sentence slowly emerged on the kitchen glass, written as if someone was still there. "It's your turn." Before anything worse happened, Sophia made an extreme decision. He returned to the attic with the diary and the doll, and destroyed them both with fire. She spent hours fanning the flames in the fireplace with diary pages, old photographs, and what was left of the doll. I cried, but I felt that I was doing the right thing. The next morning, for the first time, no messages appeared. Not that morning, not the next. Condensation continued to appear, but the glass remained clean. Sophia risked spending another week in the cabin. Nothing happened. She moved out of there at the end of that month and never returned. Years later, the house was put up for sale again. The new owner, while making renovations to the attic ceiling, found burnt remains and a charred piece of the diary with a sentence still visible. "Now, listen to me." But no other messages ever appeared in the windows. The cycle had been broken. Wet footprints that appear indoors. It all started on the third night after the move. Martin and Clara Jönsson had just moved into a century-old house on the outskirts of Bergen, Norway. The dark wood building stood on a plot surrounded by dense trees, where the fog seemed permanent. It was the ideal place to start over, after a turbulent year, the two said as they signed the papers. The house was in good condition, despite some old details. Creaks in the floor, windows that jammed, and the smell of damp wood. Nothing out of the expected for a residence of that size. On the first night, everything went well. On Monday, some lights flashed, and in the third, the footprints appeared. Wet, clear, human. Clara was the first to see it. They were in the upstairs hallway, first thing in the morning. She thought Martin had entered with wet feet after picking up firewood, but he swore he hadn't gone up at that time. In addition, they had both left their boots outside. The footprints ran from the end of the hallway to their bedroom door, and they stopped there, as if someone had walked inside the house, coming from nowhere. In the following days, the footprints returned, always appearing at different times, sometimes in the afternoon, sometimes in the middle of the night, and each time they seemed more wet, as if the water dripped from the entire body of those who left them. There was no sign of open doors, broken windows, or leaks. Nothing. The floor was not damp all around, only under the footprints, as if they were impressions from another time. Clara began to record in photos, wrote down the times, the pattern. He realized that they always came in perfect pairs, the same size, the same way, as if it were always the same person. Martin, skeptical, tried to ignore it, but he couldn't deny what he saw. The mood between them began to change. They slept with the door locked. They avoided walking around the house alone at night. The tension was constant. One night, flour was installed on the floor of the hallway. The footprints appeared again, wet, but without displacing the flour, as if they had no weight, as if they were made for something that didn't really touch the ground. That's when Clara began to have dreams, always with water, with the sound of a distant storm, and a boy standing on the shore of a lake, with heavy clothes and his face covered with shadows. In one of the dreams, she saw him waving, but not longingly. It was a slow, insistent gesture, as if asking not to be forgotten. Intrigued, she researched the house. It was discovered that she had belonged to a family in 1911. One of the sons, Lars, had drowned in a nearby lake during a summer storm. He was 10 years old. The body was taken home at the time, as the nearest hospital was miles away, and it was left upstairs, in the same corridor, near the room where Martin and Clara now slept. The night after the discovery, Clara woke up to a splashing sound, as if someone dripping water when walking. He stood up slowly, his heart racing. When he opened the door to his room, he saw the footprints, new, fresh, dripping, and at the end of the hallway, for a brief moment, he saw the silhouette of a boy, small, soggy, with his head down, the clothes clinging to the body, the arms hanging inert. He didn't look threatening, seemed forgetful, missing. She screamed. Martin ran and saw it too, for a second only, but it was enough. The figure disappeared before their eyes, as if it had dissolved into the mist that was beginning to seep through the half-open window. The next morning, they packed their bags. Before they left, Clara left a flower and a lit candle in the hallway. He whispered the boy's name and said, "You are no longer alone." Months later, the house was sold to another family. The new residents renovated everything. New paint, floor changed, windows sealed. They threw away old objects, including an old portrait of a child in robes from the last century. But every time it rains heavily in Bergen and the ground gets cold, the footprints appear again, always wet, always walking towards the back room, and always stopping in front of the door. Some say they've heard soft beats at night. Others swear that they smell the smell of lake and wet earth, even with the windows closed. But no one ever stays there for long. Lars, it seems, still wants to be remembered, the shadow on the roof during a storm. In the seaside village of Whitby in northeast England, the sea was at war with the rocks, and the wind seemed to carry whispers of ancient times. It was a city of nocturnal silences, overcast skies, and ancient legends murmured among fishermen. It was here that Eleanor Chambers decided to isolate herself for a few months, trying to escape the hustle and bustle of London after the sudden death of her mother. She rented a Victorian house high on the cliff, known to locals only as Old Number 9. The structure was imposing, with darkened bricks and arched windows, but already somewhat forgotten by time. The view was spectacular, the raging sea crashing against the rocks below, and for the first few days, solitude seemed just what Eleanor needed. But everything began to change during the first storm. That night, the winds howled as if trying to rip off the roof of the house, and thunder made the structure vibrate in its foundations. Eleanor, accustomed to the chaos of the city, was surprised by how alive the storm seemed. It wasn't just the sound, it was presence. It felt as if something was creeping outside. As I was making tea in the kitchen, the light flickered. When she returned to the living room, a flash illuminated the window, and then she saw it. On the roof of the neighboring house, completely soaked by rain and enveloped by lightning, was the outline of a figure, crouching. Property, a shadow. At first he thought he was a worker, some crazy person who had gone up there for some absurd repair. But who would be on the roof during a storm of that intensity? And why did he remain motionless, even with the wind trying to pull him away? She blinked. Another lightning bolt, and the figure was already on her roof. Eleanor ran to lock the doors and windows. The power went out completely. The only sound was of rain hammering through the glass and thunder getting closer and closer. He lit candles, grabbed the phone. No signal. He tried to convince himself that it was an illusion, a shadow of some branch, perhaps. But then the steps began. On the roof, slow, heavy, and dragged. The cracks of the wood above it indicated that it was not light. It was not human. He walked as if he knew exactly where she was, stopping at the ceiling of the room where she was taking refuge. With each lightning bolt, the shadow seemed closer to the central skylight, until finally she looked up. On the other side of the fogged glass, he saw a face, or something that resembled one, black, elongated, without defined features, just two dark circles where the eyes should be, and an imperceptible movement that suggested a smile. Not a human smile, but something ancestral, predatory, as if he was having fun with her fear. Eleanor ran to the basement, the only part of the house without windows. She spent the night downstairs, sitting with a blanket and the candle lit, until silence took over again. When dawn came, the sky was clear. The roof was dry. No signs of footprints, no trace of anyone or anything having been there. Thinking it was all a hallucination caused by stress, she tried to resume her routine, but in every new storm, the shadow returned. At first, I only watched from the neighboring roof. Then he would get closer, and then began to descend. On the last night, she was seen in the village. A new storm had been announced. Neighbors said they heard muffled screams coming from the number 9. When the police arrived, the house was locked from the inside. No signs of break-in. The skylight on the upper floor was open, and on the wet floor of the room there were footprints. But they were not feet. Eleanor was never found. Since then, when the sky closes over Whitby and thunder announces rain, many residents have avoided looking at the rooftops, because sometimes, even before the first ray, there's already something up there, waiting. The shadow. That always comes back.